Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm Brian. I'm the host of the Left of Greg show. You're going to be watching the video version of our audio podcast. Please, guys, if you like the video, like it, subscribe to the channel. There's going to be more content on there if you're already a subscriber, and a better way for us to get you guys some more stuff. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them below. Check out our links down below to get a hold of us and to actually find out more places where you can get more information about this. Please like and subscribe. Follow us on Facebook at HBPRNA. Remember, all these cases that we discuss and all the discussions that we have are through the lenses of what we call human behavior, pattern recognition, and analysis. So please like it, share it, tell your friends about it, and we hope you enjoy the show. Thanks. We're going to go live, right?
We are now live, brother.
We are live? Okay. Well, then I guess we can go ahead and get started. So thanks, everyone, for joining us. Today, we are going to be talking about what we're going to refer to as ruse crimes. Before we jump in, everyone, don't forget that you can follow me on Facebook so that you can join us when we're live and ask questions and hop into the conversation if you want. So just don't forget about that. The links are down below in the episode details. So, Greg, this was inspired by a story from just the other day, just a couple days ago here, in New York City, where paramedics were called, right? Someone called 911, something about someone having some type of medical issue. The paramedics show up, take the elevator up to the 11th floor, and then when they get off, they're met by a masked man with a firearm, who then took their supply bag and told them to head back down to the lobby. So they left, and then the bag was later found with their radio and their tablet that they use were missing. So nothing was, no injuries or actually anything occurred. The situation that they called 911 about actually did not happen. It was a fake call to lure them to the crime. So that is something that we're going to jump into today, but we're kind of just giving it the title. You actually sent it, Greg, when you said it in the article of a ruse crime, which I like, because many crimes, whether that's something as simple as a strong arm robbery all the way up to multiple homicides, right? A lot of them involve some sort of ruse. So what do you mean by like this ruse crime term that you threw at me, which I like?
First of all, spot on. Second of all, ruse crime sounds like Ruth's Chris, and we were just talking about that.
It does.
Damn, does Ruth's Chris sound good? No, and Brian, this is also timely around the holidays because criminality, and specifically criminality by ruse, increases around holidays because people aren't paying attention. They're not attending to their environment like they should. So a ruse is merely a trick. It's an action intended to deceive you, so a person can get one of the big three, access. So we understand that a low level of a high level of organization and a low level of
sophistication.
Just lost me. Sophistication is going to lead you into a dangerous situation, but access is the most dangerous part of the equation.
Right.
And the reason I sent that to you is I was laughing. And folks, don't get me wrong, it's my gallows humor. I was laughing because how many times in Chicago for Brian or Detroit for me did the pizza boy get ganked when they sent him to an address? And this is before computers, and he showed up at the vacant lot, but there was a couple of hood rats there, and they took his pizza and his money. And that's a common occurrence, right? So a ruse is the thing that gets you access. So I got to bring you to the bomb, or the bomb to you. I got to bring you to the sniper's crosshairs, or the sniper's crosshair to you. And in this, the ruse allows me to see, feel, taste something that seems normal. And then when I walk in, it's almost too late and the ambush springs upon me.
Right. And so, like you said, this goes into access, right? All criminals need criminals, terrorists, and surgeons. I don't care what it is, right? You need access to your victims, and you always put it simply, hey, I gotta bring you to the crime, or I gotta bring the crime to you, which sounds very simple and like almost like we're oversimplifying it, but in a way we're not. That's a good way to look at it, right? Because I'm generally safe inside my home. So if someone wants to commit a crime, they have to come into my home, right? That's more difficult versus getting me to come out, right? And there's a couple sides to that coin, but I think it's very easy for all of us to fall for this stuff, right? To fall into that trap.
And you talk, listen, all I got to do is do an armed home invasion. I'm in your house. But an armed home invasion is a
Yeah.
huge felony with a lot of moving parts, and people get shot and die.
And it's
So
very volatile. It's very
yeah,
the
I don't want to
situation
turn
can
this
escalate.
robbery into a
Yeah.
homicide, you know?
So
And so you're spot on there, Brian. What we do therefore is we have to play either the chameleon or the trapdoor spider or something else. And that's what I mean by low level of sophistication, if I can spit it out this morning. The idea is, a highly organized person looks at the battlefield or the football field or the boardroom and says, here are the parts that are in play. These are the things. Look, you ever had to kiss a boss's ass? Okay, that's part of a ruse to get something done or to lubricate the wheels to get a project going or to get them to lay off of you and go to, Johnson so you can get your job done. All of those things are things that we may do legitimately. Today, you and I are talking about those illegitimate things that we do that don't require a lot of sophistication to get
right.
me to your front door or get
Right.
you to answer the front door or open it slightly.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a good thing because everyone goes, well, how do you, it depending on the crime, people are always like, oh, how'd they fall for that? That's the oldest trick in the
Yep.
book. It's like, no, it's the oldest trick in the book because it continues to work because we all fall into these traps. Like it depends on what it is. I don't care if it's some type of scam via email or over
Yep.
the phone or where I get the, hey, we're, trying to sell me insurance for a truck that I no longer own because it's like I don't own that vehicle anymore. I
Right.
don't know what I'm gonna do. But no matter what it is, it's always just a little bit. There's some ruse involved, right? And like you said, you talk about organization and sophistication and access. And this crime that this guy committed, specifically drawing them into this apartment building to a known area to him. Very low level of sophistication. Didn't need anything. Just needed a phone to call 911. Right?
Yep.
Didn't need much else than just needed some patience, right, to sit there and wait, right? And then, but in terms of organization level, it was highly organized because it was so simple, right? And all he needed was,
Had an
hey,
address,
yep,
had a floor,
yep,
probably reconned the floor to make sure that the cell phone would work. Simple things that we might take for granted, Brian, but those are also going to be the root of finding this guy that perpetrated this crime. You get what I'm trying to say?
yeah,
That unique little snowflake left his fingerprints, but here they were how he approached the crime.
got it, got it. All right, so there's a number of things that kind of we fall victim to, so to speak, right, of our own kind of cognition, different how we observe things or different
Mm-hmm.
biases, right, that kind of fall into this. So what occurs and why do we continue to walk into something like this?
Yeah, let me street that up. And the idea is that we talk about confirmation bias a lot.
Yeah.
Folks, take a minute, sit down, drink your orange juice, and hit Google or whatever site that you go on and look it up. Biases come in many forms, and there's thousands of them. As a matter of fact, I think it's a grad school requirement now to come up with 3 and hang them on, the wall. Because I'm seeing all these splinter factions. Are you? You know I'm not lying, right?
No. Actually, that's a great point to address up right
Yeah.
front, address right up front because I post different stuff about different cognition biases and stuff that we have and how that works. And everyone says, oh, there's a bias for this and a bias for that.
Yep.
And a bias isn't inherently bad or good, right? It's actually it's a mechanism. There's a reason behind it, right? Why we see things a certain way or why we
Yeah.
assimilate
The
to different
best.
groups. But I just want to throw that out there. It's like it has a negative connotation, but it's just something. It's just a way to explain something that occurs, right?
So have the folks that are listening now or tuning in live. Hi, Facebook. I don't have FaceTime or American Dad or any of that. But the idea, thank God Brian does. The idea is think of it as a carpenter. There's a lot of carpenters that listen to our show. When you cut something on a bias is an angle. So all
Right.
we're talking about is a mental angle that some people have, and that mental angle sometimes is stronger than other people. So in terms of observation and perception bias would rule us rather than we rule them. And I'd like to throw out a little quote. The question is, do I believe it when I see it, or do I see it when I believe it? And the
Right.
problem is that if we expect to see something, Brian, we're going to see it. And so when you expect to see the injured party and you're the EMS or the first responder going to the 11th floor, when you come off and the guy says, hey, give up the cheese, it's a robbery. The first thing you say is, no, seriously, where's the injured party? You still don't
Right.
ruse is on you. And that's why, we have to remember that a ruse doesn't have to be really good. A vague background context in this context, using it again, works much better than a sharp created context. And what I mean by that is the evidence that's gathered by our eyes can make us imagine things that aren't or weren't there.
Right.
And you and I saw that over and over and over when we were teaching soldiers, U.S. Army ASAT, or we were teaching Marines for the Combat Hunter program that I developed. The idea, Brian, is when we made these ranges, we put Marines like a shirts and skin fashion at 1,000 meters away, and all we had them do is act very simple scripts and said, here, don't go outside of the purview of this script, do this behavior. But then we put 30 of them left to right and 19 of them, front to back. And all of a sudden, the story started to emerge. Well, the story didn't emerge. What happened is the context that frames what we see is more important than what we're looking at. And so the context drove relevance. And so
Yeah.
therefore, if we saw a guy riding a bike, that was bike guy. If we saw a guy
Right.
working on an antenna, that was radio shop guy. And what happens is all of a sudden the rich granularity of our village fills in. How is it different than what we do every day with our brain? When we encounter an environment over and over, we pattern select. And after we create that pattern, our brain repeats it. So when we go up and we see a person dressed as a waiter, it's a waiter. When we pull up to the drive-in window, it's a Starbucks. We don't
So
often mix up the bank and go up and order a latte from the bank drive-through.
no, that's actually a really good point. There, this goes into explanatory storylines and how we
Yes,
see and perceive our environment. We since 99 out of 100 times things are what they seem to be, we always expect them to be what we think they are, right?
precisely.
And so that goes into a general cognition bias, right? And again, there's like you said, there's hundreds of these, and they're coming out of graduate programs
Every day,
by the
new.
dozen. So but each one, it's like, and someone just takes it a step further and goes, oh, well, it also is this effect too, and we know that effect happens over here, and it's like, great, another one. But the whole point isn't to go so overwhelmed that, hey, I how do I prevent myself from falling into these? It's like, well, you're not actually going to prevent. Look, they're all there. So it's just balancing out what you see, right?
Yeah.
To give it to the specific example of these the ambulance drivers, like how many, or the paramedics that showed up, I mean, how many calls have they been on throughout their career? How many decades of experience do they have where they got a call and then that they then had to respond to that situation? Now, it may have been different in the sense that, someone over exaggerated or under exaggerated the situation,
Yes.
but there was always a patient there waiting for them, or someone who was supposed to be the patient, right? So it's like it never, enter there. Why would they ever think, hey, when we get off this elevator, we might be getting robbed here, right? They almost never thought that because they never
You're
experienced
so you're on such an important topic. I don't want to get off of this
that.
for
Yeah.
just a second. One, I want our viewers and listeners to think of the next day for that EMS crew. The next day, they were screwed up like a football bat.
Oh yeah, I
And
bet.
everything that they did all day, they were call back, dispatch. Hey, hold on, Jim. Let me go check. Okay, the idea behind that, Brian, is it so bucked the trend of their historical perspective that now they didn't know what to do. But the problem with being a human is a day, a week, a month goes by, and they would fall for it again. You see, patterns are so strong that they don't just affect us, they affect the people immediately around us.
Right.
And you'll remember, Brian, folks, has an incredible memory, second only probably to Shelley. Shelley's like a flipping elephant when it
I
comes to
I have a
remembering.
horrible memory.
Yeah, yeah, but just like your Vegas stuff, when I said you're the best guy for Vegas, he loses all the time. But you'll remember, it was a setup, you bastard. You'll remember that I wrote that lesson, not a lessons learned, it was Instructor Devel back in 2006 on Lita Sullivan. So Lita Sullivan, 35-year-old, she's at work. All of a sudden, the flower delivery man comes up,
Yeah.
and everybody afterwards said, it was odd because the flower delivery man had gloves on and he had the dark glass and he had all these things that you wouldn't notice with the delivery man, but he had flowers and he had the hat, right?
Yep.
And so he comes right into a place of work. He asks for her by name. She steps up and he sprays her with 9 mil rounds at point blank range, killing her. Okay. He walks out of and I can't remember now because it was 2006. It was like a country club setting or a golf course or whatever this thing where she was working. And this guy had passed all these people on the way in, Brian, and walked calmly out to the parking lot. Never been caught. Okay. And when they asked the witnesses, they say, yeah, he's a flower delivery guy. Well, what was he dressed like? Dressed like a flower delivery guy. Well, if you had 100 people in a room and asked them flower delivery guy, each one of them would have a different description, but there would be a commonality. So the
Right.
commonality is what creates the
The
file
file.
folder.
Yeah.
So they all relied on the file folder, and that's why the guy didn't get caught, because you can't jump that trend, that repeat file folder, that cartoon image of the bomb with the little fuse and
Yeah.
burning. Do you see what I'm trying to say? They're so ingrained in our memory that myelinization has occurred, and therefore eyewitnesses tend to be horrible witnesses. The guy got away from it. A guy got away for a homicide crime by dressing like a flower delivery person. And it's not the first, and it's not the first time somebody's going to dupe the EMS either. You know?
No, and that's a good point, and to take into account all of the different cognition biases and everything you're talking about too, is that this is why eyewitnesses are such, are the worst
Horrible.
type of witness. And then, but then the same thing, people, bash them or go, well, how could you not remember seeing this during this situation? Or how can you, you know what I mean? I would have seen this, but it's like, no, no, you don't. Like, no one does. None of us do, if we don't take that time to kind of take a step back and go, wait a minute, what am I seeing here, or what's taking place? And if we don't look for those little subtle cues out of our environment. And now maybe there were none in this specific situation we're talking about with the, yeah, right, they didn't take the phone call, they didn't go,
Yes.
that was an odd call, or that was something missing from there. But maybe the dispatch, now looking back, goes, hey, you know what, they didn't give a typical description of a scene or a patient or this that I normally hear. You know what I'm saying? So
No,
so
no, you're onto something there
you
too.
can
So
start right there, because and I don't want to seem like we bash on the obviously the paramedics who got robbed. You know what I mean? But why would they? They had no reason other than to believe, this is going to be what we were told it's going to be. And I think that in right there is
yep.
where you kind of, that's where we fall into these.
So let me throw two at you, and this is the Sidewinder missile coming in an exoset, and
Great,
I'm sorry about it, Brian, but it's an
great.
angle, it's a bias. And for the folks that are at home, here's your homework: Amadou Diallo. Look
Oh
up
yeah,
Amadou Diallo.
yeah,
Now look at a
that's
caper that
huge.
happened in Ohio overnight, where a guy with a Subway sandwich with the key still on the door is dead in his living room because he's shot by a copper. Now, I'm not trying to burn down a city. I'm saying stop. Sometimes what we observe isn't what we perceive, and our brain tells us a lie. But the lie is so realistic that we can't get out of it. So, Brian, if we were going to have a coin, what I just talked about with Amadou Diallo in this caper in Ohio overnight is the flip side of the ruse that we're
Yes.
talking about. So put it in context. This is why mistakes happen. One, I have what I have observed, what I'm perceiving in the moment. That has visual field, auditory, meaning I'm
Yeah.
listening to it, olfactory, which means I'm smelling it, and tasting it. You know, the umami of the feel of the background
Hmm.
of the dirt on the baseball field, and the smell of the hot dogs and the crack of the bat. You see what I'm trying to say? How that fills in everything that I'm about to see. So that's called observation. One thing where I just gave you 4 or 5 spirals. Next thing is the science of the observation. Okay, gravity was in play. The person was wearing clothes. The environment was real. There was not a fog or a vision or a geographic thing blocking me from seeing it. Then let's add logic. Okay. Well, the person's a flower delivery person. How do you know that? Well, he got out of a van holding flowers and he was wearing
Right.
a flippin' hat. And then we add to that the faith. Well, I've had many other instances of flower delivery people. Why would this be different? Now, I just talked about 4. Can you imagine the spirals that would come out of just the faith one or the logic one? So when we see something, okay, we take so much for granted. And then all of a sudden the microphone from the news guy comes up and says, hey,
Right.
what was it that you saw? That's where things go wrong. So you can't
Well,
immediately fault a person and say it was some form of racism or some anger or anxiety.
okay, so that ends up happening in those cases where they pick, like you just said, they'll pick one angle, one
Yep.
bias, and
A
go to
bias.
that,
Yeah.
right? And they'll go, well, it's because of gender, or it's because of his race, or it's because of his religion. Now, can you find data to support your claim? Probably. You get what I'm
Oh my
saying? Meaning,
God. With
I
the
can.
internet today?
Well,
Of
that's what I
course
mean.
you
Like
can.
you
Yeah.
can find things that seem related to that,
Yes.
that seem to enhance that argument, but when in fact, and that's the problem with looking at these cases, is we don't look on the individual merits of the case, which is funny. That's what you have to do in the legal system if you if you go to
Every
court,
day.
right?
Every day.
We would, so, but we meaning the general population, the public, and especially how things get reported, is we don't have that training. We don't understand that. We don't understand how different each one of these cases are,
Yep.
and We don't understand the difference between contributing factors and proximate cause. And we don't get this because, we're not taught how to do this stuff. But like, and for those listening that do follow us on Instagram, the last week I posted a whole bunch of stuff, Greg, all about uh, some of the human processing system, right? So, but things like sensory adaptation, channel
Yeah.
capacity sequencing, adaptation, change blindness, context and relevance, template, prototype, all kind of a little mixed match of all this, which is everything that we're talking about in this case right now, right?
Yep.
Not just the one
And
about the
that you and I
paramedics.
take for granted that we deal with in
Yes,
our world every
that
day. Right.
that Lita Sullivan case that you talked about with the
Yep.
delivery man and the flowers, and how all of those things play in. Now, the idea is, I can't sit here and go, well, if I just understood, sensory adaptation better, then that won't happen to me. It's like, well, no. It's like, well, if I just understood my channel capacity is diminished, that'll never happen. It's like, well, no. Like, we're explaining this, that there's reasons why these things occur. So in
Yes.
order to combat some of those things, right, in order to not fall victim, one, I have to be aware of what those are. And I have to realize that it is, I don't care how big, tough, badass, trained you are, smart you are, whatever, we all fall victim to this in a way,
Yep.
right? To
We've
some
been
degree.
to funerals for those people. The
Yeah.
most badass person that I've ever seen in my
Yeah.
entire life, right? And that happens. So yes, we do fall victim. And I'll give our listeners and our viewers, Brian, just a really brief example. So it was when we were still working in and around Benning, and I apologize for not having the notes up. I could look it up, but you do it. We were there, and a guy that was up in, I think it was Gwinnett County or whatever, called the EMS and said he was having a heart attack. When they got there, the house was on fire. They called the fire department, and when the police showed up, now they've got the police, the fire, and the EMS.
Yeah.
He started shooting at him, and you recall that they looked back and said, okay, it was from a domestic. He was getting a
Hmm.
divorce. He was getting evicted. Okay, then fast forward to October a couple of years ago, 2018. Arsonist, they're getting closer to him. They think they know what's going on. He starts his house on fire, calls and says, oh my God, there's a house fire. Waits till the fire department shows up, gets a rifle, shoots at them, standoff. He kills himself. Okay. First guy, I believe, was killed by the police, but it doesn't matter. January of this year, Brian, in Honolulu, a couple of coppers got killed. Lady at the
Yeah. Same
apartment
thing. Burn the
complex,
house.
Diamond Head.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah.
And what happens is that guy actually calls and goes, hey, shit's broken loose. There's dead bodies everywhere. He's the caller. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Now he gets everybody in the area, starts his stabbing rampage, burning the place down, and it's a horrible fire and a horrible situation. Each one of those situations, different human, different state, different set of circumstances, but they all came to the reasonable conclusion that I'm not going to drive by and kill a bunch of people. I'm not going to drive to the police station and do it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring them here. Why?
Yeah.
One reason that students shoot up their own school,
Hmm.
one reason that coppers go and blow their brains out in the place that they just retired from is it feels like home. This is my home. This is my castle. That's where those terms come from. So I'm going to shoot myself right from my own porch after I've created this havoc. Brian, do you think that because I gave you three spread over a 6 year period, do you
Oh.
think there's going to be one in 2 years? Do you think there's going to be one next month?
Well,
Come on. So we know it, but just predicting it isn't enough. We have to see it forming. We have to see
Well,
that
that
momentum
that that
building to
that's
avoid it.
that's that's the idea. All right. So
Yeah.
even when people see those cues forming, and
Yep.
like even like, you go back to, I don't know why it just popped in my head, but Bianchi and Bono, I mean, they were dressing
Perfect
up, they
example.
were, doing police officers, and then they started with, well, they were mostly targeting a lot of prostitutes, stuff like that. But that, the prostitutes, let's say, that they were targeting, they're pretty, they're on the ball in terms of being on the street and knowing what's up and seeing
Yeah.
things. And generally criminals kind of are, people grew up in those types of environments. You can identify that's just because you have so much more familiarity, right? And they can read their, the person that a little bit better, or at least in terms of their biases, right, and what they're looking for.
Yes.
And so even though they kind of knew, a lot of them, like, something's up here, or I don't know, or maybe something's off, but then that denial kind of kicks in. So that's a
You're
good
right.
point too, because you talk about, like you just said, that being able to identify these things. How to identify a ruse right in the moment, right there? One, that's kind of difficult to do, because even when I do start to go, something doesn't seem right here, I oftentimes people tend to continue down that path anyway because things like denial and us wanting to believe and us wanting to prove what we think it should be. And so that I think is the difficult part. And that
Yeah.
part I know, it's easy to say, well, you got to get some training, but if I don't have that ability, it's how do I weigh those options, Greg, when I do see those things coalescing,
So
right?
there's another great point, Brian, and you brought up just an incredible point. So listen to me. You have a symbiotic relationship between the magician and the people that he fools. So a street magician that's going to make the coin appear or the rabbit disappear, they have to occupy your senses and show you what you're expecting to see, and then the surprise comes when something unexpected arises. That relationship is I have to project and you have to believe at least part of it. If you believe none of it, none of this would
Well,
happen.
yeah.
You see what I'm trying to say?
That
So
that's the
in
that's the saying, Greg. It takes two people to lie. One person to tell the lie, and one person to believe it.
precisely. So in the situation of a ruse, as the ruse begins to develop, there's certain parts of it, certain elementals that will fall off, and they'll coalesce as anomalies. So when we see the anomalies start to form, like uh, uh, you can't say I would pick up on the flower delivery because it could be the wrong address. It could be
Yeah,
somebody that's a hidden admirer. It could be myriad things. Do you get what I'm trying to say? But the guy parks in the parking lot, walks all the way across the thing, asks for a specific person, then comes out with the gun. There was time distance gaps there, and the gift of time and distance can save us. But on most of them, what happens is it's just something that doesn't fit the basic environment, and we go along with it because we don't want to be the
yeah,
rock in the pond. You have every right in the world to ask somebody delivering something for identification. You have every right in the world to say, I didn't order any flowers, have them leave them at the front desk. Do you get what I'm trying to say when they call you by name?
right.
People are going to say, people are going to say, sorry about that non COVID cough. By the way, PBG, get better soon. I know you're listening. We know, Brian, that there's a way to be sensitive to your environment without being hyper alert. And just by saying, hey, do me a favor, leave the package at the front, that's you stating that you don't want to be victimized. When you talked about Bianchi and Bono, what you hit the nail on the head is they started with their ruse of being police officers against prostitutes,
Yeah,
and it worked on a couple of the
for a
the
little
ones
bit.
that were gullible. Yes.
Yes.
Then all of a sudden they tightened that up and they couldn't hit that anymore.
Yeah.
So what did they do? They used the cop scam. They still use the cop scam, the undercover detectives, but they moved out from prostitutes to the neighborhood. And
Yeah.
guess what? They did a couple and they worked. They got the little girl, they got the woman that was going to college right in front of her own family. But guess what? Coppers tightened that up again. So they had to keep
They had to
modifying
adapt.
their game.
Yeah.
You don't think David Copperfield, you don't think that Siegfried and Roy
Exactly. Yeah.
have to modify their game because there's people out there trying to break it down? All we're saying, slow time down and go, does what I'm seeing fit what I
Yeah.
expect to see? And if it doesn't, if it has anomalies,
What is
create
it?
explanatory storylines.
Yeah.
Where might those lead?
No, that's I mean, same thing. Those are great examples, and then how they have to adapt. And
Yes.
you're going Bianchi and Bono, and then Siegfried and Roy in the same sentence, and
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
saying,
Well,
yeah,
and they fall
absolutely.
like tigers. I mean, this is no
Yeah.
secret.
So
There's
no, they got
on
yeah,
death
but
row. That was
well, I can't remember which one got bit. Was it Siegfried or Roy? Um,
Bianchi.
it was so so
We are
I
live,
think that
folks.
was a different situation.
Yeah,
But
crack is a hell of a drug,
no,
Lois.
but it is. But those two are that's the way we look at it. Those are two sides to the same coin, as we would
Yep.
always say, right? One is for entertainment, and this is fun. I'm here. You're paying to see a show, and the other is murder, death, kill, right? So, but it's the same
And a
process. It's the
fine line,
framework.
a hugely thin line, Brian.
It is, because that same person the street magician who's there to entertain can also steal your wallet pretty easily, can
Or be the
also
pedophile that moves your kid off
right,
towards the,
and that
from the mall.
that's exactly what we're saying. It's so if I approach it from that, about those entertainment purposes, because it's a little
Yep.
bit easier for me to understand, because like everyone goes, yeah, I know there's some ruse going on when you're sitting there. I've been to one of them in Vegas one time, where it was one of those shows. I mean, it's incredibly entertaining, and you can't see how they're
Right.
doing it, but you
Right.
know that there's something going on, right? That he didn't really saw the girl in half, right?
Yep.
Like I get it, but they do such a good job that you can appreciate it, and I think you almost fall into that same thing when I've had like really horrible like street bum low level criminals try to pull something, and when you see it, like you start laughing because you're like, this is the worst scam I've ever heard. This
Because
is
you see it in slow motion,
yeah,
framed by the context and relevance that you learned from training and
yes,
from experience. And they know too, all of a sudden they're caught up in the ruse and go, this guy, something's wrong.
yeah.
He's a cop, he ain't buying it. He's
Yeah,
another criminal in your case, you know.
yeah, in my case, yeah, absolutely. No, and I think obviously that's the difficult part, and you do mention, and we talk about like slow time down.
Yep.
And I think that's a big thing, is because we're all in such a rush and we're so distracted by everything we have going on, is that makes it easier for them. So sometimes that single point of focus, I always tell people, hey, do one thing at a time and start there. So it's the same thing
When
like
you
with,
said you were talking to sorry for the interruption, but folks, you
yeah,
got to understand, Brian's talking to 100 coppers and detectives and SWAT team people, and he tells them, this is how you make a significant change: shut off your phone and put it away.
yeah.
And nobody wanted to do it. And then he goes, no, I'm not gagged.
No,
You
I'm
know, this is the
serious.
first part.
Turn your damn phone off.
And then they couldn't do it for a few minutes, and they all had different excuses why. We don't want to do part of it, Brian. Part
Yeah.
of it is that we're comfortable in our skin, and we don't want to increase our situational awareness. We don't want to change our routine. We don't want to get those flowers delivered and see what's on the card. Listen, it's okay to be a little suspicious. That doesn't mean paranoid. Let me throw this at you. Okay, let's talk about Bruce Pardo. So Bruce Pardo, coming up on a holiday, all
Yeah.
right,
I
kills
know this
12
one. Yeah.
people and then himself. Now let's wind the clock back a little bit. Bruce was in financial troubles. There was things going on, lost family members, like divorce type things. Was perhaps embezzling, all these things that are going on. All right, and then all of a sudden, 3 of his family members go missing and are reported missing just before the holiday. And then all of a sudden, he shows up at a big Hollywood or holiday party, and guns blazing, shoots everybody, and then burns the place down. If you heard the story of Bruce Pardo, you would say
Yeah.
nobody seeing him on the road would go near him. Everybody would dial 911. There's no way anybody would let him into the house.
Hmm.
So now let's wind the clock back. Bruce Pardo goes out and buys a $15 Santa Claus suit. He shows up on Christmas Eve at the very door of the people that he's threatened before. He's already killed 3 before he gets to the door, Brian. And he goes, ho, ho, ho. That's his ruse. Did it work? It worked. Today, 13 people are dead because of the Covina massacre back in
Yeah.
2008. And Brian, let me ask you this. Now, folks, look that up. But Brian, 1, that's a ruse crime.
Hmm.
2, has Santa Claus ever been the ruse to get in other places and do homicides?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think that's perfect, perfectly fitting for this time of year, on how
Perfect.
we allow access to individuals just based on literally a holiday, and it
Yes.
goes to it's kind of funny how we learn. We talking about different biases, and some of them are learned, right? We're taught that like we how many photos do we have of the little kids freaking out on Santa Claus's lap because he's
Everybody's
scary,
got one.
but then eventually you get to an age because your parents have to tell you, no, it's okay, you can. But everything about that guy is like the kid is going like, no, this is horribly terrifying. This is homeless Pete on the street, that you keep me away from when we're walking down the street. Now you want me to sit on his lap. And
Brian, we were in Dubai, we were in
yeah,
Bahrain, we were in Saudi Arabia. Even there, because they have relationships with people that aren't Muslim, we saw images of Santa Claus. We saw
yes,
wreaths and Christian displays as well. And you're precisely right. We say every day to our kids, don't sit on homeless Pete's lap. Don't go by that guy. This
yeah.
guy could be a
Don't
pedophile.
take candy from strangers,
Yeah, but one day a year we dress you up and we shove you there. We force you even against your own better instinct. And that dichotomy goes through the rest of our life. Listen, we don't want to bother somebody and say, hey, listen, I don't know you, step away. Do you remember we talked about it many years ago. Remember, what's the guy that's in Ghost Protocol and all those films? Tom Cruise.
Oh,
Tom Cruise walking down the line, and about the 3rd person in line doesn't interview him. He's with
he
Nicole
sprays
Kidman.
sprays
The 3rd
flour
person line,
or
yeah, it's
water, yeah,
all
something like
over him.
that.
You know,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
just
yeah,
douches
yeah,
them. You remember that?
yeah.
And He, because he was in line with all the paparazzi, didn't know how to react. So he was smiling, then he was like
Yeah, it
pissed, then he
was
was like, why
weird.
would you do that? Why? Because he didn't have a teleprompter. He didn't have a producer or a coach telling him, hey, okay, now Tom, this is where you get pissed and throw that axe kick. You
Yeah.
see what I'm saying? So it's so foreign to our pattern, and our pattern is laziness, repetition, right? That all of a sudden that's the angle, the bias that they use. The ruse gets them close to us. Don't allow a ruse during the holidays to force you to let your guard down. And that's at the gas station, Brian. That's when you're punching in your pin at the ATM. That's when you see people that you don't know in front of the store you're about to walk into.
No, and that's good, and it can be easy to explain away even when it's extremely obvious. A perfect example of my buddy's gym that I train at, because of everything on lockdown, like you have to do you can do anything outside. So you have to bring stuff out, and they have this parking lot next door that's no longer used to this business that isn't open anymore. And so it's great. We're out there, and then over in the corner of the parking lot, out of nowhere, this vehicle just pulls in and parks in the farthest possible corner where there's no one
Right.
around, at a closed business where there's three other, it's in a business park area. So it's not even in like a residential or commercial, it's literally like all a business park. You know what I mean? You get different like warehouse type businesses in that area, and it just sits there. And I'm like looking around, everyone's going on about their business. I'm like, did anyone else see that vehicle? Just what purpose? And then as soon as everyone looked, like, yeah, why the hell is he parked there? What's
Right.
going on? And I said, well, let's looks like we're going to throw a little run into this workout and do a little lap past his car, see what's going on. And it was something that simple, but absolutely no reason to get there, that we don't often attribute value to those things that we need to attribute
But
value
you
to.
you just hit on a very important point. When we're not sure, our brain goes to humor. So there's been many times when
Right.
I was undercover or when we were together and we're armed or we're on a,
Yeah.
a diplomatic detail or
let's
something like that, and
let's
we're standing
keep it
somewhere and all of
let's
a
let's
sudden,
keep it let's
yeah,
keep
yeah,
it legally.
the
Yeah.
legal. Where's your dad when we need him? But all of a sudden you see a player coming in through the crowd, and everybody at the right time goes, here's the anomaly. This guy's got a body bomb. Something's going wrong. And what do? We go, hey, this is how it ends. You know what I'm saying? Or we say, here it comes. And we joke about it. Why do we joke about it? Because our brain is still telling us, don't waste any calories. Yesterday was fine. Today will probably be fine too. Remember, folks, that was a survival instinct because we relied on those survival instincts so we wouldn't waste calories that we didn't have. We could only gather so much, we could only hunt so much. So danger didn't come often, but when danger did, the danger warning Will Robinson signs were so profound and prolific that we had to listen to them. But now we've evolved past that, Brian. We've evolved
Right.
to a level that even when those pieces start fitting together and I've got the golden ticket, we don't believe it. So all we're saying, give yourself the gift of time and distance. Nobody approaches you now just because it's the holidays. Nobody's going to drop something off without you saying, hey, listen, ask for their identification. I didn't order the package, right? Because listen, these people with the ruse are smart too. They'll prey on you and say, hey, you won this sweepstakes. And you think, well, I probably entered a sweepstakes. I'm sure I did that. And guess what?
I,
Greed. Greed. Okay. You
well,
talked
yeah.
about prostitutes, sex. Okay. The sex industry. Hey, come on up. I'll do anything you want. You go into the hotel and the guy's there with a bat and says, give up the cheese. And you go without your wallet and without the sex. Why? Because we get duped when it's anticipatory, when we're going, ooh, this is going to be fun. That's when we're the dumbest, and that's when we should be most alert.
No, I agree. And then, there's different that you can swing that in the other direction too, which happens to be still occasionally, where it's
When I'm the
we
prostitute, I
no
don't
yeah
quite
no
understand.
no, but where you go too far. Because I had one where like my wife was like, hey, did you Venmo someone, 300 and I was like,
Right?
no, absolutely not, I haven't used that thing, and I only did it for this, and that was it, blah blah. And then they said, oh, it came from his account, like check. I was like, well, yeah, I had to pay so and so, but that was $325. And she's
Right.
like, yeah. I was like, well, you said 300. I didn't do that. And she's like, oh my God, you're a complete idiot. I was like, yeah, that was my bad. Sorry about that.
Yep.
But we become like almost like a little hyper vigilant on it. But the one of the big points too that I kind of wanted to make is how, like you said it a couple times, how we all fall into this, but also how it's that explanatory storyline.
Yeah.
um, we use that as an example, is that things have to be explained. Your brain will create an explanatory storyline. That's why this occurred. And sometimes denial set in because you're still stuck in that loop, that record groove of, no, this is what's supposed to be happening. I'm supposed to be, doing this, that this is just a flower delivery man. It couldn't be anything else. Right. And I think it's a good point, and tell me if this is a good way to describe it, is those storylines are going right now as you're listening to this
Yes.
podcast, whether you realize it or not. It's
Yes.
constantly happening. So you're,
And they're protective. They're intended to try to
yeah.
protect your ego and your psyche and
Well,
calm
protect
you
your.
down during the day.
I think it's a good point to point out. You said protect your ego. What do you mean by that? Because
Yeah.
it's, yes, we're generally primed for survival, not just survival for ourselves, technically survival as a species as a whole. But what do you mean protect your ego? Because I think that's a little
So
bit of a distinction that I like, and I want you to
so let me
explain it
give
a
you
little.
two examples to get us there.
Yeah.
First example, autoerotic asphyxia. I
That's a good
handled a
one.
caper. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Look that one up, folks. Black vans will be circling your house.
Jeez.
So I went on a case where instead of thrilling himself, a guy killed himself, and it was a very elaborate scene. The person had a bias for very specific things, and that angle ended up killing him. When you're alone, you can't have a safe word, right? But the way out that they intended, they never got to, and so they were hanging in their own garage. There was substantial evidence that this person had engaged in this practice before. There was ample forensic pathology evidence that this was, in fact, the proximate cause of death. There was ample evidence on the internet searches that the person had researched how to do it safely. But the mom was an old school person, and mom said it's a homicide. And I said, ma'am,
Yeah.
I know how hard this is to believe, but your son was just enjoying this behavior and it got out of hand. And like, they never intended to hurt themselves or you. They never intended you to find them this way. As a matter of fact, they've done it before and cleaned up on it. And it's unfortunate, but it's true. She
Yeah.
would never come out of her belief metric, her view of the world. Even when she died, she hated the police. She hated me as an investigator. There's no way I will ever believe that my son would do this to himself, even in the face of evidence. Boom! Flash forward to a suicide. Kid shot himself in the mouth. Did some damage, but never exited. If you know anything about suicide and the forensic pathology and the wound ballistics, you'll know what I'm talking about. But there was a lot of bruising and there was a lot of swelling. So it appeared as though the male, had been beaten by somebody before they shot themselves. And it wasn't. It was all internal, the gas that was
Got
trying to
it.
escape.
Yeah.
But because this kid was young and because they didn't leave a note and because they didn't say to the person, I'm suicidal, but it was just before Christmas. Do you get what I'm trying to say? I'm home alone. You went out. I don't want to go back to school kind of thing. The forest for the trees, Brian. The two parents in the family were assholes. Why, pardon my language. Why would we ever do this? This is a murder. You're not investigating. You should have pulled, fingerprints. You should have investigated the whole neighborhood. Brian, sometimes it's too good to be true, and that's where this
That
comes from. The question is, do I believe it when I see it, or do I see it when I believe it? And you can talk yourself into anything with limited amounts of evidence.
that's another good perspective to take on this, and I think that's always, it's a good one, especially because you kind of talked about school shooters earlier, and that's a
Yeah.
perfect example of that same way of thinking, that mother of that person who accidentally killed themselves in the that caper you discussed, but is the same way why we don't recognize it, why we don't technically see it in our kids, even though that denial kind of sets in and they see it, right? We always want to see it as, no, this is what they did. My son or daughter or whatever would never do that.
Oh, come on.
And that's a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow, where we always take the approach like, look, you don't know what people like when you say, well, my so and so would never do that. Anytime I hear anyone say that right then and there, I'm like, yeah, that's a huge red flag, because that means that person probably would do it. Like, we often attribute value judgments on people that maybe that kind of get in the way of how they actually are, and because it kind of it, like you said, it ruins our ego and the way we think and believe of that individual. We don't want to be wrong, and we also don't want to think badly about someone. Like I'm
No, a
always like,
parent
you
doesn't want to lose a kid,
no,
and the parent doesn't want
we
to
don't
have
even
to
want to think
face the
bad
fact
about
that
it.
city
Yeah.
market that, hey, your kid died. Oh, wow, he was young. Was it cancer? No, it was suicide. Brian, those are hard things. Those
They are.
stigmatize
Oh,
people. We've lost friends to suicide, and it's hard to talk about it even today.
yeah.
Don, our good friend Don Yeager, Chuck Yeager
Chuck
died.
Yeager died.
God
I
bless
know.
Don and his family.
Yeah.
Okay, Brian, it was 2 weeks after my mom died, but Chuck was a different kind of friend. Do you see what I'm saying? So it hit
Yeah.
me differently.
Right.
Those are not because of my brain's chemistry. They're from the ego that drives my brain's chemistry. So psychologically, how things affect us are hugely important as to what we see. We see a ghost when we need to see a ghost.
Yeah.
You see what I'm trying to say? We see a Sasquatch when our brain doesn't have the capacity to rule out other things that it could have been, or we choose not to. So a psychological bias can be ruining your relationship with your son. It can be screwing up your relationship with your boyfriend or girlfriend. But Brian, we don't want to address it because that means that we're different. That's how suicides start. You know what I'm
No,
saying?
that this
It's the
you
same recipe.
yeah, no, or the same ingredients, maybe different
Ingredients. That's
recipe,
a
right?
better word. Yep. Yep.
What you just said, I kind of we haven't gone into this too much on any podcast about what we talk about when we mean your ego. I mean, we always say humans have in a generalization is we all humans have a fragile ego system. We have our
Yep.
thoughts and beliefs about ourselves and others, and we don't want anything to ruin those thoughts and beliefs.
Yep.
And then what people come in and they talk about ego is a bad thing, and you got to control your ego. And I understand what they're getting at, but that's almost not really possible. I mean,
It's unrealistic. It's
yeah,
aspirational, but unrealistic.
okay, it's an inspirational way. Yeah, I'll agree with that. And what I mean by they say that is, look, being aware of it and understanding how it affects you is better than trying to go, well, I'm gonna just be more humble, or I'm just gonna do this. It's like, look, that's a tagline. That's a platitude. Like, this is how you're wired. And you brought up, you said, um, you say how our ego drives our
Yes.
brain chemistry, and then our brain
Yes.
chemistry then drives our ego, and that can become that feedback loop, right? That
That's
positive
correct.
or negative feedback loop, depending on which way
Exactly.
it goes. So two sides of the coin. That could be good, it could be bad, it could be, allow me to not see things that I should see and not be aware of it. And that's hugely important to understand, because the more times I'm right, the less likely I am to think otherwise. I'm always, especially with the little one, with the kid, just because of the work we do and all the cases we study and talk about. Like, anytime my wife says, well, she would never do something like this, and I'm just like, all right, you got to wipe that thought from your head. Like,
Yep. Start over.
humans are
Right. And this
humans,
is how
people
to
are
create
people.
that thought. Yep.
Don't, especially when it comes to kids, it's like you can't blame her for doing something if she doesn't know what it is, right? She's mimicking things, she learned something from here, or said a word, or did something that was like, hey, where did that, like, it came from somewhere. It's not their fault, they had to learn that, right? And I always
Yes.
take that as approach when you're looking at kids, because it's easier to understand it and see how they develop, because it's like practice, it's like slow motion practice, right? Especially when they're trying to lie or come up with a
Yes.
story, and you're sitting there watching, you're like, oh man, this is so bad, but like I'm laughing inside. He's like, they're learning how to lie, because it's the greatest thing in the world, right? I mean,
Right.
just to get
What a
you out of
gift.
trouble. Yeah, I know. I mean,
You
really,
get what I'm saying? The cost benefit analysis of a kid with a lie.
it's
I
like,
mean,
so I'm
write
gonna
that
get in
down. There's a
trouble.
story.
I'm gonna get in trouble. You're gonna take a bunch of stuff from me. I'm gonna be grounded, or I just tell you this and then none of that happens. Like, oh well,
Exactly.
how do I? Why I'm gonna do that the rest of my life? And that's
Exactly.
how it works. And so we all fall victim to that. And so I just want to kind of address that, when we say ego, we kind of mean it differently than a societal someone saying, oh, that person has a
Yeah.
massive
We're not
ego.
talking philosophy. We're not
Yes.
talking an ego where this person has a certain amount of bravado.
Yeah.
We're talking about your view of you psychologically and sociologically, and your view of you. Like I'm 100 years old now, and a biscuit shy of 350, right? But still, when I go out to places, I imagine myself as that 27-year-old, never in better shape in my
Yeah.
life. Hey,
Yeah.
Louise,
I
see you
know.
later, right? And when that skids to a halt, well short of and the people go, oh, creepy old guy. Okay, I take that and I go, wow, how could they have that misperception? Because my perception of me isn't this old,
Right.
failing oh, look at the size of that prostate. My look of me is really good, and sometimes your worldview of you doesn't coincide with reality, and that's a bitter pill to swallow. And we don't like that, so we insulate ourselves. We insulate ourselves with floppy clothing, or eating too much, or not working out, or working out too much. You get what I'm trying to say? There's all these
No,
different
that's
biases,
the
right?
one for me because we've been so busy, especially
Yeah.
with like the last couple of years. Like it's like what I used to be able to train and do has gone downhill so much, and I don't do notice it
Our
until
viewers have noticed, by the
I
way.
try to do some workout, and then like halfway through, I'm laying in a puddle of my own sweat and urine and whatever else,
Going,
crying,
what is
going like,
that?
"What
Yeah.
happened? What
What fell
happened
out
to
of
me?"
me? Right, right.
So no, that's a good point because I still see it as like, no, I can still do that. And then you put the weight on the bar, and you're like, damn, this feels pretty heavy. Normally, it should be
Right,
moving a lot
right.
faster. But I think that's a better way to, or at least a way to explain how we what we mean when we say your ego, because like you said, it's your personal view, so internal, that's an internal ego, and then it's externally on the rest of the world of how I view it, and
Precisely.
we have our beliefs, and this is why we fall into these things.
So a adept criminal is going to use your projection of yourself against you.
Yes.
Salesman and
Yes.
advertiser. Do you see a used car salesman? All of those folks are going to exploit what they see. So if you walk around with victim drawn on your forehead, you're probably going to be victimized. If you walk around alert to your situation, you're probably not going to be victimized. And Brian, for the holidays, that's close enough. Don't fall for a ruse. Don't get close to the flame because you could get burned. Give yourself the gift of time and distance, and make sure that you have the scales drop from your eyes and you're seeing, smelling, feeling, tasting exactly what's happening before you take that next step, before you unlock the door, before you go out to your car.
No, and that's I a good one. Everything's a teachable moment, right?
Mm,
And same thing we had we were selling our place and had people that were supposed to show up and do the inspection for the buyer and all that stuff, right? And they came up, because we're at a kind of condo complex and there's fire safety standards and stuff, like we have out our back off of our balcony and porch and stuff like that, there's a nice stairwell that goes down, but
sure.
it's unused because it can funnel in from two different, our condo and the one next to us on the third floor. You can come out this door that's locked from the inside of your place and go out, and it's a fire exit, but that's all it's there for. It's completely unused other than for that purpose. And so there's never anyone on it, you know what I'm saying? You have to come up our front door if you want
Yep.
to come into our place. And then sure enough, McKaylee saw someone on there and was like, whoa, oh, and walked out and said, "Oh, are you here for the home inspection?" And of course he said yes, because he was. But I had to tell her, I was like, "Babe, like you just created
Gave
that
them a
storyline, and you
script.
told them that it's okay for you to be here. I now believe you." So anyone else walking up like that, it could have been a criminal. I had to explain it to her, and she was like, "Oh, like I never saw it that way." And I was like, "No, exactly. Like you fit. This is a you that storyline was already there, and so your brain said, oh, it must be this. You never took it as, why is there a person standing on my fire escape balcony that should never be there?"
First of all, spot on again, Brian. But listen, if you're listening to our broadcast right now, what Brian just did was training.
Yeah.
Training, practice, rehearsal, and experience. That's the magic. Everything's a teachable moment. You're not saying that this college graduate with degrees and all this experience is stupid. It's just in this instance, because that Rolodex file came up blank, that person chose something that somebody could in the future exploit. You got to stop. This is where, Brian, you have to take your ego and you got to put it on a shelf for a minute and go, I am vulnerable. You know what?
Hmm.
I still think that I can kick, do a jump spinning roundhouse, over a six foot
Right.
male's head right now. And I probably would hit him in the groin and then be in the emergency room for breaking my hip. But in
Yeah.
my brain, I can still do it. That
Exactly.
carries with it the potential for access. And I never, ever want to allow a person access to me unless I say, now you can come in. After I've, seen that it's a person I know, it's not a scam, it's something, how many years of scam calls did it take for now nobody answers their phone? Do you
Yeah.
see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, or
Brian,
now
how
it
long did
finally
it take?
blocks them for me. It says potential spam call on my
You
phone
know,
instead of
yeah,
like me
you
actually.
got my
Yeah,
number in that loop too.
yeah, I do. I
So,
do.
folks, step away from the ego for a minute. Take a look at your surroundings. You're not invincible. Okay, your armor doesn't cover everything, or you wouldn't be able to bend and move and swallow and drink and fart. Slow time down a little bit
Yeah,
and just take a look at what the world is showing you. Make sure that you got artifacts and evidence that would tend to support what's happening, and you're not saying words like probably or it could have. If you're
yeah.
saying those kind of words, Brian, you're talking yourself into trouble.
No, I think that's kind of a good point to kind of to wrap that up and how to actually do that, and or as we say, just
Great use of rap, by the way, for the holidays. I
be
I got I got what you did there. I see
be
that.
be mildly entertained with your environment. Now, I always do the like
Yes,
the little kids, like how they just got to stop and look at something, they tilt their head because they don't know what it is, and they're trying to make sense of their environment. Well, we're
we've
too
made a
busy.
living out of that, Brian.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's all. That's all we do is do the head tilt and go, "What is that?" So,
Yep.
and then
Now, if
and
there
like
was
you
only a
said,
way to turn that into money,
yeah.
how do we monetize
So
that?
the training point is good, especially if you got family members like you just
Yes,
said. I gave the example of McKaylee, and then the little one, the insurgent. She's already at like brown belt level. She
yep.
just comes back as, man, that guy was angry, and then McKaylee's doing like, how do you know he was angry? And she'll point to right here between her eyes. She goes, and she couldn't pronounce it. She was like, yeah, the core muscle right here. I
There
was like,
you go.
corrugator, good job. Like, it's that pain
That's
muscle
great.
is
Okay,
hilarious. So,
the problem is that you guys, I'm going to be reading about this in a California
yeah,
Journal one day.
yeah.
Where have your parents been for the last 35 years? I don't know. That's You've created a monster, but it's a
I
good monster,
I have. She's
cookie monster,
yeah, well, and without the cookies, it's
just a
just a
monster.
monster. So I think on that note, it's actually a good wrap to the ruse that we're talking about here. So without cookies, that guy's just a monster. All right, thanks everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to check out the episode details below. Subscribe. Please hit the like button on here. Leave us a review if you can. It helps out. It gets it out to more people, and tell your friends
Thanks
about
to
it.
Macedonia, Brian.
Oh my God, I completely forgot to give a shout out to at the beginning. I was going to, I completely forgot. We are number one podcast, or excuse me, number one in social sciences in Macedonia, and number five of all science podcasts in that country. So I think that's pretty cool. Thank you to everyone from Macedonia who's listening. I would love to come to your village sometime, and we can hang out and have fun. So it was in a
Well, there
remote
goes that number. Yeah.
so
Well, we're number 10 in Japan. Japan, I love it. Let's
yeah,
go to
yeah,
the
yeah.
Japan.
So Macedonia would be cool. I've never been there. I would love to go. So
We love
reach
you.
out leftofgreg@gmail.com, and we'll come visit you. That would be fun. We can do a guest show there sometime. So everyone, thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget that training changes behavior.